Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are having a fabulous Tuesday. I just want to introduce myself today. This is Mya with the Mya Duboyce Podcast. We're going to jump right into today. Life insurance might not sound exciting, but to me, it's a financial superhero cape. And today, I'm going to tell you why and how I finally put mine in. As you guys know, as of last week's story, I did share about the 5 car accidents I had. This was prior to that. This was back I was 28 years young. I was sitting in a networking event. There was this gentleman that worked for farmers. He was telling his story about what he did and how he did it. And when he explained and he started talking about life insurance and how it takes care of his family and what it did for his 2 kids when his mother passed away. Excuse me. And how it was able to change things and change the life experiences for his kids and his grandkids at that time. And of course, got me to thinking. I was a single mom at the time, barely making it by, paying rent, paying the bills. And of course, I had 2 kids. One was 8 and one was a year old. And of course, you can ask yourself, a single mom, how am I going to afford another payment, another item to add to the daily task of paying the utilities, paying the rent, paying the mortgage, just simple things like that. And then I began to ask myself, what would happen if I was in a car accident? And of course, as you can hear, that did happen, a few years later. Besides that, but thankfully I was covered. Thankfully, I do want to say I am so blessed to be alive today, to be able to see my daughter graduate in May, be at my son's graduation. So those kind of things, we always plan for the what if and hope that it doesn't happen. Okay. And of course, at this point in time, I did end up making a meeting with this gentleman. It took about 2 times at the meeting of just talking with him, seeing how things were going to be. And then I set up a meeting to come in the office. We sat down in the office and he says, "Do you know how much you need?" I said, "No, not really. I have no clue. I don't even know what I would qualify for." Well, in discussing this, he said, "Well, what do you want to see for your kids? What are your dreams and your hopes for your kids, even your grandkids?" So at that point in time, of course, the kids only being 8 and 1. I said, "Well, if anything happens to me, I do want my children to be able to go to college, come out debt free. I want them to be able to afford a car insurance, the daily living task." And at that point in time, we figured up right at about 150,000 would work. So of course, we sat down a little bit longer, took some time, of course, and right under $80 a month, my kids were covered. At the time, I didn't know I had a whole life policy. I didn't know I had a term life. So that being said, brings us up to about probably 6, 7, 8 years now. And of course, got the little card in the mail. As we all know, the little flyers to where, "Oh, you qualify for $25,000. Sent that in. At the time, I was thinking about my husband because we were having some physical difficulties, some physical elements that were kind of on the back of my mind. That what if something happened to my husband? Would we be able to make the rent? Would we be able to make the mortgage? Things like that. So then, of course, they called me. They called again. And they called again. As we know, we all thought they were solicitors. Then one day, I get this knock on the door. The knock on the door. of course, was Roy and Ariel Bean. So they say, hey, do you have a few minutes? I'm like, no, not right now. So, of course, we set up an appointment. When we set up that appointment, they come back. And of course, we're talking and we talk about my husband. Of course, my house was as crazy as a zoo. I had my son, my adopted son, and his girlfriend, and a baby. And then, of course, I had Abby. And then, of course, we had 3 dogs. And then we had, my husband, and, in a 1,200 square foot trailer house at the time, you know, just crazy as could be. We're still sitting there and we're discussing and we're talking. And he says, well, what do you have? And I said, well, I have 150,000. He says, are you sure you have 150,000? And I said, I'm pretty sure. So we set another appointment up to go over my policies. We had to, of course, call the company. We called the company right there. He asked them question. He asked them, did I have a cash benefit? Did I have all the things that an agent knows to ask another, agent? So he gets off the phone and I said, explain this to me in layman terms. Explain to me what this might mean. And he said, well, in simple terms, you have a term policy that ends in 2036. You have a whole life policy. Whole life policy is not bad, but that does cut your money in half. At the time, Lucas was still in college, so I did have that expense to help with. Abby still had about another 4 years left of high school. Okay. And at this point in time, I had already had one of the car accidents. Then I agreed to talk to my husband, talked it over with him, and he said, we really need something that's going to cover me if something were to happen to you. So we went back to the drawing board. It took about 3 weeks. Number one, I have allergies to medications. So when these allergies come about, of course, when I had my surgery, I did have a left knee replacement. And so the medication I was on, most insurance carriers would not take me. So we got to looking at F&G Life. Okay. I ended up getting what we call a universal life index. It does draw some cash value, so it does add to what I currently have. And then I also got a Transamerica. And as we all know, Transamerica has been around, guaranteed, to pay out for me and my daughter. This put a little bit of coverage on her if something would have happened to her. And then later, we did look at Lucas also for his policy, for if something were to happen, at least we would have a little bit of coverage. And of course, you know, when I first started looking, all I was looking for was to cover my kids, not realizing, that I would need to cover not just the main bills, but what if one of them wanted to grieve for 6 months, grieve from a year? They would be able to do that. They would be able to pay the monthly bills, or if something happened to one of them and they had to go into a facility, that they could and be able to afford that. Right now I know that the cost of, anything, as far as if you're an Alzheimer's home or dementia home, anything like that, being, up in age of any kind, that it's about, 50 to $8,000 a month right now. Okay. So that led up to, then we had the 5 car accidents. Of course, I was very, very thankful that we had it. Anything could have happened with any one of those. Okay. And, it's, it's one of those things where when you think about life insurance, it can be difficult because, yes, you're thinking about the end of life, but you're also thinking about what happens on this side. What happens if you get cancer? What happens if you are incapacitated for any given amount of time? Okay. Because when you have cash value on a policy, it does allow you to be able to pull some of those. Okay. Now, I also want to give you a website information again. It is www.funeralocity.com. And again, that is www.funeral, that's FUNERALO city.com. This is a website that allows you to track your averages, okay? And know if you have enough. Not only just enough to pay for your expenses, say for instance, if you're being cremated. Right now, cremation is running up anywhere between 2,000 to 5,000, depending upon how extravagant you want to go with that. If you're looking at a casket and everything, you're looking at anywhere between a 7,000 to maybe a 10,000. I know here in Colorado, we're looking at 8,500 for that. Okay. And also, if there's a topic that you would like to um, have, or would you would like me to speak about, or maybe even just a carrier so that you can have more information, maybe if there's, explaining what a cancer policy is, explaining to you maybe what um, a accidental death life policy covers. If you have questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask in the chat, and I would be willing to address any of your questions or your concerns. Again, this is my story on how I covered my family, the questions I asked myself. When it comes down to it, you know what do we want to leave? What type of legacy do we want to leave for our, not just our immediate family? What do you want to have for maybe your own sister, maybe your own brother? You know, when everything went down with my stepmom, my dad was like, Maya, I'd like to have a little bit more life insurance in case I have, the house to pay off, car bills, just to be able to allow some time to grieve. And so we went looking. Of course, we found him a policy, so just because you do have certain conditions doesn't mean that you're out of the question, you're out of the game. I know a lot of people, they're like, well, I got diabetes, or, I've got whatever it might be. There's things that you can work past that and be able to get through it. It just might take a little bit of time. It might take some time to be able to get to the point you need. Again, if you have any questions or concern and would like for me to reach out, let me know and I can answer any of your questions. I hope you guys have a fabulous Tuesday evening.